You ever have one of those moments where someone thinks they have all the power until they realize they just picked a fight with the wrong person? Yeah, this was one of those moments. I had just finished a long shift, one of those days where you're running on coffee and sheer willpower. When I decided to stop by a residential community to see an old friend, nothing fancy, just a quick visit, maybe a cold drink, and a little peace and quiet before heading home. The neighborhood was pristine, the kind of place where every lawn looked like it had been trimmed with nail clippers and the sidewalks were so clean you could eat off them. As I turned onto the main street, I spotted an open parking space near the clubhouse. Perfect. I flicked on my signal, slowed down, and was just about to pull in when he appeared. A man in an overly stiff uniform stepped right into the space like he was stopping a presidential motorcade. One hand went up in a dramatic halt motion, the other resting on his belt like he was about to unholster a weapon, except, spoiler alert, he didn't have one. I hit the brakes, mostly out of curiosity. He marched up to my window, chest puffed, out, like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. "You can't park here," he said, voice dripping with authority. I raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" He nodded, arms crossed now. "This is private property. HOA rules state that only residents and authorized guests can park in this area." I glanced around. There were no signs that said "no parking," no permit requirements, no reserved markings. I looked back at him. "Says who?" He gave me the smuggest smile I'd ever seen. "Says the Homeowners Association Security Department. Now, I've dealt with actual security officers before. Some of them are professionals, good people just doing their jobs. This guy? Not one of them. Something about the way he stood, the way he spoke. It wasn't about keeping the neighborhood safe. It was about control. I leaned against my steering wheel, keeping my voice casual. "All right. Let's say I believe you. What's your name?" His smirk faltered for half a second. Just half a second. But I caught it. "Doesn't matter," he said, waving me off. "What matters is that you need to move your vehicle, now." I gave him a slow nod. "And if I don't?" His chest puffed up even more. "Then I'll have your car towed." Oh, now this was getting good. I glanced at my dashboard, where my actual police badge was half covered by a file folder. I could have ended it right there. Flashed the badge, watched him crumble. But where's the fun in that? I decided to let him dig his own grave. So I leaned back, completely relaxed. "All right, officer," I said, voice smooth. "You got ID?" His face twitched. "I don't need to show you my ID." "Oh, buddy, yes you do." And this was where the real fun began. I could already tell what kind of guy I was dealing with. You know the type. The ones who love pretending they have power, who get high off the idea of making people jump at their every word. HOA guys like this, they weren't here to protect the neighborhood. They were here to control it. And judging by the way he was practically vibrating with self-importance, I was about to watch the performance of a lifetime. "You need to move. Your car, now." His voice was sharper this time, like he was expecting me to roll over and comply. I didn't move. "Why's that?" He scoffed, like I was the dumbest person he'd ever met. "Because this is private property. Only authorized residents and their approved guests can park here. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps out the channel. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from." All right, let's keep going. I looked around again. Empty spots everywhere. No reserved parking signs. No markings. Nothing. "Seems like there's plenty of space," I mused, tapping the steering wheel. "That's not the point," he snapped. "The rules are the rules." I nodded slowly. "And you enforce these rules?" His chest puffed out. "That's right." I had to bite back a grin. "Interesting. And, what happens if I don't move?" His smirk was back. The power trip was hitting. "Well," he drawled, adjusting his cheap-looking belt, "then I'll have no choice but to issue you a citation." I widened my eyes in mock concern. "A citation?" "That's right." He nodded smugly. "And if you refuse to comply, I'll have your vehicle towed." Oh, this was rich. I rested my arm on the open window. "So let me get This straight, you, an HOA enforcer, have the power to issue citations and order vehicle tows? Exactly. His smirk deepened, like he'd just won a chess match. And these citations, I continued, barely keeping a straight face, are they legally enforceable? Like, do they hold up in court? He hesitated, just for a second, but I caught it. They're HOA violations, he said quickly, trying to regain control, which means they're binding for all community members. I tilted my head. And what if I'm not a community member? Now he was thrown off. What? I smiled. You just said the violations apply to community members. But what if I don't live here? What if I'm just visiting? He frowned. Then I can still have your car towed. I let out a slow whistle. Wow. You guys really run this place, huh? His chest swelled with pride. We take our job very seriously. I leaned forward just a bit. And by we, you mean? He blinked. What? Who's your boss? I asked. What agency do you report to? For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. I work for the HOA board, he said. I nodded, as if that answer meant something. Got it. And your badge. What department is that from? He put a hand on his belt, but suddenly he wasn't as confident. And I could tell he was starting to realize he'd messed with the wrong person. I've been in law enforcement long enough to know when something doesn't add up. And this guy, he was one giant red flag. Up until now, I had humored him. Let him puff out his chest. Let him play his little power trip. But now that I was really looking, I could see it. The cracks in the performance. Let's start with the uniform. At first glance, it might have fooled someone. Crisp enough. Had the standard security blue to it, but up close, the fabric was cheap, not the heavy-duty material actual enforcement officers wear. The patch on the sleeve wasn't embroidered. It was printed, like something you order off the internet. His belt, completely empty. No radio, no cuffs, no equipment, just an unbuckled holster, probably for show. Then there was the badge. Now, real police badges? They have weight. They're engraved with official department names. They have identification numbers. His? It looked like something you'd buy at a Halloween store. Just a shiny gold plate that read, HOA Security Officer. No department name, no jurisdiction, no authority. I let my gaze flick up to his face. He was watching me closely now, probably realizing I wasn't as easy to push around as the old ladies and teenagers he was used to bullying. All right, time to see just how deep this scam ran. I leaned against my car door. So you got a badge. Cool. Where's your ID? His whole body stiffened. What? I smiled. Your ID. Your official identification. You know, the thing that proves you're actually allowed to enforce these rules you keep talking about? He hesitated. Too long. I don't need to show you my ID, he finally snapped. It's HOA policy. I let out a slow whistle. That's funny, because real law enforcement officers have to identify themselves when asked. His jaw clenched. I told you, I'm with the HOA. We operate under different rules. Uh-huh. I nodded. So, just to clarify, you're saying you don't have to prove who you are, you don't answer to law enforcement, and yet you claim you can issue citations and fines? His face reddened. Look, you're asking a lot of questions. Just move your damn car. I grinned. See, now you're getting defensive. I'm not getting defensive, he snapped. I just don't have time for this. I held up my hands. Hey, I get it. People question your authority, and you don't like that. But here's the thing. If you're legit, it shouldn't be a problem. So again, show me some ID. His nostrils flared. I cut him off. You don't have one. Do. You? His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Gotcha. Because here's the thing about fake authority. It only works on people who don't know any better. And unfortunately for him, he had just picked the absolute worst person to try and intimidate. Straightened, dropping the casual act. All right, let's stop playing games. You say you can issue citations? Show me one. I don't have my ticket book on me, he stammered. Uh-huh. What about that tow truck you threatened me with? Where's that? He swallowed. It's on standby. On standby. I repeated, nodding. Got it. And where's your dispatcher? What's your call sign? He had no answers. His eyes darted left, then right, as if looking for someone, anyone, to back him up. But he was alone, and he was losing control. I don't need to answer all these questions, he said quickly. Just move the car. I stepped forward, not aggressive, not threatening, just enough to make sure he felt the shift in power. Nah, I said. I think I'm gonna stay right here. His breathing picked up. His fingers twitched at his useless belt. I could see the exact moment he realized he wasn't in charge anymore. And the best part, I still hadn't told him who I was. At this point, I could practically see the gears grinding in his head, trying to figure out how to get back control of the situation. He was losing his grip, and he knew it. And when guys like him feel power slipping through their fingers, they only ever do one thing. They double down. His jaw clenched and his chest puffed out again, as if sheer confidence would erase the fact that he had just been exposed. All right, he snapped, pointing a finger at me like he was scolding a child. I've been patient, but I'm done messing around. I almost laughed. Patient? This guy had been foaming at the mouth to flex his little fake badge since the moment I pulled up. You have exactly 30 seconds to move your car, he continued, voice rising now, or I'm taking further action. I leaned against the car door, completely unbothered. Oh yeah? And what's further action look like? He squared his shoulders. I'll be issuing a formal HOA violation. That means you'll be fined. And if you continue to ignore the rules, we'll escalate. I raised an eyebrow. Escalate how? His smirk returned. He thought he had me. I'll have your car towed. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider it. Interesting, and who exactly is towing my car? His smirk faltered. The HOA's contracted towing service. Oh, cool. What's their number? His face twitched. I don't have it memorized. Uh-huh. So you're telling me you can order a tow, but you don't actually know who does the towing? He shifted uncomfortably. That's not important, I grinned. I think it is. I could see the frustration creeping in now. He wasn't used to people pushing back. Look, he snapped. You're making this harder than it has to be. Just move and we won't have a problem. Oh, we already have a problem, I shot back. See, you've been throwing a lot of threats around, but you still haven't shown me a single piece of actual authority. No ID, no citation book, no tow truck on the way. His face burned red. I don't need to explain myself to you, he growled. I smirked. Oh, but you do. That's when he played his final card. You leave me no choice, he said, standing taller. I'm calling for backup. I blinked. Then I laughed. Actually laughed. Backup? I repeated. Oh, this I gotta hear. Who exactly is backing you up? He lifted his chin, voice full of manufactured authority. The neighborhood response team. I swear I almost lost it. The neighborhood response team. I repeated, like I had just heard the dumbest thing in the world. That's right, he said, doubling down again. We have a dedicated security unit trained to handle situations like this. Now I was really entertained. So let me get this straight. You're calling your private security goons because someone is parked? He nodded, looking proud of himself. Exactly. I wiped a fake tear from my eye. Man, I bet the real cops are shaking in their boots. His smirk returned. You should be worried. They take these violations very seriously. I leaned in slightly. Oh, trust me. I take impersonating law enforcement very seriously. His expression twitched because he knew he was losing. I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm under my gaze. Then I took a deep breath and spoke the words that would make him wish he had never walked up to my car. You know what's funny? I said, voice calm but firm. He frowned. What? I reached into my pocket, slow, deliberate. I pulled out my real badge, and the second his eyes landed on it, his entire world collapsed. The second I pulled out my badge, the power in the air shifted. Gone was the cocky smirk, the puffed-out chest, the overconfident stance. Instead, the so-called HOA enforcer froze, eyes darting between my badge and my face, like his brain couldn't quite process what was happening. I let the moment stretch, savoring the delicious realization, sinking in. He had just spent the last 10 minutes trying to flex on the actual sheriff. I held the badge up a little higher, letting the golden emblem catch the light. "Yeah," I said, voice slow and deliberate. "That's sheriff to you." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, his hands twitching at his sides. I didn't—" "What?" I tilted my head. "Didn't realize you were threatening an actual law enforcement officer? Didn't think to check who you were talking to before throwing around fake citations?" He took a half-step back, the color draining from his face. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding." I laughed. "Oh, there's definitely been a misunderstanding." I slipped my badge back into my pocket and took a slow step toward him, but not on my end. He held up his hands like he was suddenly the victim here. "Hey, listen, I was just doing my job, okay?" I raised an eyebrow. "Your job?" He nodded frantically. Yeah, I'm just following HOA protocol." "Oh, really?" I crossed my arms. "Then let's go over a few things, shall we? First, you refused to show ID when asked. Second, you threatened a law-abiding citizen with fines and a tow when you have no legal right to do so. And third, you tried to intimidate an actual officer of the law." His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but he had nothing. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make sure he felt every word. "You know what that sounds like to me?" I asked. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head. No, impersonating law enforcement." Boom. If his face had been pale before, it was ghost white now. I wasn't impersonating anyone," he stammered. "I never said I was a cop," I chuckled. "Oh, come on now. You strutted up to my car, ordered me to move, refused to show ID, threatened me with fake citations, and even said you had a neighborhood response team on standby." I smirked. "Sounds an awful lot like someone trying to play cop, doesn't it?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I could see the gears in his head desperately trying to spin, trying to come up with a way out. Too bad. He was already done. "All right," I sighed, rubbing my chin. "I'll tell you what. I'll even give you a chance here. Tell me exactly which law gives you the right to tow my vehicle." Silence. "What about the one that lets you issue fines?" More silence. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Come on, man. You were real confident a minute ago. What happened?" His jaw tightened. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe." I nodded slowly. "Right. And you do that by harassing people? By making up fake rules? By intimidating residents who don't know any better?" "I wasn't harassing anyone." His voice cracked. "I was just—" "Just what?" I cut him off. "Throwing your weight around because no one ever questioned you before?" He had nothing. And now it was time to end this. I pulled out my radio and clicked it on. "This is Sheriff Last Name. I need a unit at my location to verify an individual impersonating an officer." His eyes went wide. "Wait, what?" I shrugged. "Hey, you said you weren't impersonating anyone. Shouldn't be a problem." "Then, right?" He panicked. Look, Sheriff. Sir, I don't think this is necessary," he said quickly, hands waving in front of him. "We don't need to get anyone else involved. Maybe we can just, forget this happened?" I scoffed. "Oh, now you want to de-escalate?" "I didn't mean any harm, I swear," he pleaded. I was just following orders from the HOA board, that's all." I smirked. "Oh, don't worry. I'll be having a chat with them, too." The sound of sirens echoed in the distance. His head snapped toward the noise, panic fully setting. "In? Oh, God," he muttered, looking around like he could somehow escape this mess. "Oh, no." I clapped him on the shoulder, grinning. "What's wrong? I thought you wanted to call for backup." His face, priceless, and the best part, this was just the beginning of his problems. The wail of sirens in the distance was music to my ears. The fake HOA officer, however, not so much. His head snapped toward the sound, his entire body stiffening like a deer caught in headlights. "Oh, no," he muttered under his breath, his eyes darting around like he was looking for an escape route. Spoiler alert, there wasn't one. I leaned against my car, arms crossed, letting the moment sink in. What's wrong? I thought you wanted to call for backup. He turned back to me, his face pale. I meant the neighborhood response. Team, not... He gestured toward the approaching actual police car, like it was a damn fire-breathing dragon. I smirked. Well, here's the thing, buddy. When you start throwing around fake authority, sometimes real law enforcement shows up. He swallowed hard. This was the moment he realized he had lost. The squad car pulled up, lights still flashing, and my deputy stepped out. Officer Carter. Solid guy. No patience for nonsense. He took one look at the situation, then back at me. Sheriff, he said, nodding. Then he glanced at the fake cop. What do we got here? I gestured toward the fraud. This fine gentleman has been parading around as law enforcement, threatening residents with fake citations and attempting to tow cars with zero legal authority. Carter's expression immediately soured. That so? The fake HOA enforcer's hands shot up. I never said I was a cop, he blurted out. I enforce community rules. Carter took a step closer, sizing him up. Oh yeah? You got credentials? The fake officer hesitated. I smirked. Go on, show him your ID. He fumbled around his pocket, then slowly pulled out a laminated card. Carter took it, inspected it for all of half a second, then let out a laugh. This isn't an ID. This is a laminated printout with your name and HOA security written in Times New Roman. I whistled low. Damn, didn't even spring. For a fancy font, the fake enforcer looked like he was about to faint. I have the authority, Carter cut him off. No, you don't, because in order to enforce legal parking restrictions, issue fines or tow vehicles, you need one very important thing. He leaned in. Jurisdiction. The fraud gulped. And guess what? I added, grinning. You don't have any. By now, a small crowd of residents had gathered, whispering to each other as they took in the scene. Then one of them, a middle-aged man in a golf shirt, stepped forward. Wait a damn minute. Is he not a real officer? Nope, I said. Not even close. The man's face darkened. That little twerp has been fighting me for years, an older woman chimed in. He threatened to tow my car because it was 2 inches over a line. Someone else added, he told me I couldn't have my front porch light on past 10 p.m. because it was an HOA safety violation. And just like that, the floodgates opened. He gave me a $150 ticket for parking in front of my own house. He tried to ban my kid's skateboard because it was a liability issue. He said I needed HOA approval to plant flowers in my own yard. One by one, the complaints poured out, a tidal wave of frustration that had been building for years. The fake cop looked around, realizing too late that he was completely screwed. His face twisted in desperation. I was just following orders. Carter shook his head. Yeah? Whose orders? He hesitated. Then finally he muttered, The HOA board. Oh, now this was getting interesting. I grinned. You're telling me that the board was okay with you shaking people down, handing out fake citations, towing cars based on rules that don't exist? He opened his mouth, then shut it again. He knew he had already said too much. Carter sighed, pulling out his notepad. All right, buddy. I'm going to need you to sit tight while we check with the HOA board. In the meantime, he gestured toward his squad car. I think you should take a ride downtown. The fraud's eyes widened. Am I under arrest? Not yet, Carter admitted. But we are looking at a possible charge of impersonating an officer, and if these residents decide to file complaints, maybe fraud and harassment too. The CEO. Fake cop looked like he was about to pass out. I gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. Don't worry. I'm sure your neighborhood response team will bail you out. The crowd erupted in laughter. And just like that, his reign of terror was over. There's something truly satisfying about watching a wannabe authority figure crumble in real time. And right now, this fake HOA enforcer was falling apart at the seams. His hands twitched. His breathing had turned shallow. His eyes darted between me, my deputy, and the growing crowd of angry residents like he was hoping someone, anyone, would bail him out of this mess. Spoiler alert, no one was coming. To save him, I leaned against my car, arms crossed, enjoying the show. So what's it gonna be? You want to keep up the tough guy act, or do you want to start talking? I didn't do anything wrong, he stammered. I never said I was a cop. Carter, my deputy, sighed. You impersonated an officer by acting like one, issuing fake citations, threatening to tow cars, intimidating people into thinking you had real legal authority. He pulled out his notepad. That's a crime, buddy. The guy visibly flinched at the word crime. Look, I was just doing what the HOA told me to do, he practically shouted now, voice cracking. I grinned. There it was, the first official throw under the bus moment. Carter and I exchanged a look. We both knew what that meant. If this guy was already blaming the HOA, he was going to spill everything. Carter clicked his pen. Great. Then you won't mind coming down to the station for a chat about how the HOA runs things, right? The fake enforcer froze. I don't think that's necessary, Carter shrugged. Well, see, I do, because I just spoke with dispatch, and they're pulling up your history. And guess what? You don't even have a valid security license. The guy paled, which means, I added, not only were you impersonating an officer, but you weren't even legally allowed to act as security. I smirked. That's 2 crimes. Should we go for 3? He opened his mouth, but he had nothing left, because he knew he was done. Carter didn't wait. He clipped his handcuffs off his belt. Turn around. What? No, wait. The cuffs snapped around his wrists. And just like that, the HOA's little attack dog was officially out of commission. Now, you'd think the HOA board would have rushed to defend their guy. Nope. The second Carter called them, they immediately went into damage control mode. We had no idea he was operating outside the law. He was acting on his own. This is a total misunderstanding. Sure, because people accidentally impersonate law enforcement all the time. The real kicker? A couple of residents had been recording everything, and when that video hit the internet, oh, it blew up. Suddenly, local news outlets were asking questions. The HOA board started dodging interviews. And within days, a full legal investigation was underway to determine just how much the HOA knew about their fake cops' activities. But the best part? After all the nonsense, all the lies, all the fake authority power tripping, I finally did exactly what I had planned to do in the first place. I parked my damn car, no citations, no threats, no HOA enforcer trying to play cop. Just me, legally parked, sipping my coffee while the HOA board scrambled to clean up their mess. As I sat there, one of the residents, an older woman who had been watching the whole thing, walked up to my window. You know, she said, smiling, I think that's the first time I've seen someone stand up to that guy. I tipped my hat. Well, someone had to do it. She nodded toward the squad car, where the fake enforcer sat handcuffed in the back seat, looking absolutely miserable. I bet he's regretting every life choice right about now. She chuckled. I smirked. Oh, you have no idea. And with that, I leaned back, took a long, slow sip of my coffee, and enjoyed the sweet, sweet taste of justice. There's nothing quite like the moment when a community realizes they've been played, and then finally decides to do something about it. By the time we hauled the fake HOA enforcer off in cuffs, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. People were outraged, not just because he had been impersonating an officer, that was bad enough, but because he had been getting away with it for years. And the worst part? The HOA knew. The video of the arrest spread like wildfire. Within hours, local news picked up the story. Social media ate it up. A guy pretending to be a cop, running his own little dictatorship in a fancy HOA neighborhood? That's internet. Gold. And oh boy, the comments were brutal. This dude was out here playing GTA HOA edition. Imagine getting arrested in the same parking lot where you tried to act tough. Not all heroes wear capes. Some just sip coffee and watch fake. Cops get arrested. But while the internet was having a field day, the real fun was happening right here in the neighborhood. After years of being pushed around, the residents were done. Turns out, when you give people a common enemy, they unite fast. Within 2 days, a group of homeowners called an emergency meeting to demand the HOA board be investigated. By the end of the week, the board was scrambling to explain how they had let an unlicensed, unqualified fraud run around issuing fake citations, threatening residents, and generally acting like a wannabe dictator. Their excuses were hilarious. We were unaware of the Extent of his enforcement practices. We assumed he was properly licensed. We deeply regret any inconvenience this may have caused. Inconvenience? One lady stood up in the middle of the meeting and slammed down a binder full of every fake citation the guy had issued over the past 2 years. Inconvenience? She snapped. He fined me for having Christmas lights up in January. That's when things really fell apart. The HOA had no choice. They were being investigated for allowing fraud, harassment, and possible mismanagement of funds. And that's what you call karma. But my favorite part of the whole thing? It wasn't the internet roasting the fake enforcer. It wasn't the HOA board scrambling to cover their tracks. It wasn't even the sweet satisfaction of watching justice unfold. It was the lesson that stuck. See, for years, people in this neighborhood had just gone along with it. They assumed the HOA enforcer had real power. They assumed they had to obey, that the fake citations were legit, that the rules were real. They never questioned him, because he acted like he was in charge, and that's exactly how fake authority wins, by making you believe it's real. So when the dust settled and the HOA board was on the brink of collapse, I decided to leave the neighborhood with something more than just a good story. I left them with a lesson. The morning after the HOA meeting, I stopped by the clubhouse one last time. A few of the residents were gathered outside, still processing the week's chaos. I leaned against my car, sipping my coffee. "So," I said, "what did we learn?" One guy chuckled. "That HOA rules aren't actual laws." I nodded. "That's a good start." The older woman from before, Mrs. Henderson, crossed her arms. "That just because someone wears a uniform doesn't mean they have real authority." "Bingo," I said, raising my coffee like a toast. Another guy smirked. "And that if a sheriff tells you to show ID, you should probably just do it." I laughed. "Yeah, that too." Then I got serious. "Listen, folks," I said. "This kind of thing happens all the time. Maybe not with fake HOA cops, but with people in positions of fake power. Landlords, security guards, even regular people, who just act like they can tell you what to do." They all nodded, listening. "But here's the thing," I continued. "Authority isn't real unless it's backed by law. You don't have to roll over just because someone talks tough. You don't have to accept every rule just because someone in a uniform says so." I let that sink in. Next time someone tries to pull rank on you, ask questions, make them prove their power. And if they can't, I smirked, then they don't have any. Mrs. Henderson clapped her hands. "I like this, Sheriff." Someone else laughed. "Me too." I took one last sip of coffee, set it down on my dashboard, and slid into my car. As I started the engine, someone called out, "So what happens to that guy now?" I shrugged. "Well, I imagine he's having a very interesting conversation with some lawyers right about now." That got a round of laughter, and with that, I put the car in drive, tipped my hat to the crowd, and rolled away like a boss. As I pulled out of the neighborhood, I spotted one last beautiful sight. The HOA sign at the entrance, the one that used to list all the strict parking and landscaping rules, had a big red sticker slapped across it, "Under investigation." I smiled, because sometimes justice isn't just about arrests and courtrooms. Sometimes it's about watching fake power collapse, under the weight of its own lies. And trust me, that's a damn good feeling. What do you think about this story? Have you ever seen someone get put in their place like this? Where are you watching from? I love seeing how far our community reaches. Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Don't forget to tap the bell icon to stay updated. Your support means the world.